Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. Here's a story I never thought I'd tell. Not because I was afraid of judgment, but because I honestly didn't know how to accept what I saw with my own eyes. She dropped her champagne glass before she fell. That's the first detail I remember, the sound. Not her gasp. Not the way her knees buckled. Just the sharp clink of glass against tile as her fingers let go. We were 20 minutes into the reunion. She hadn't spoken a word to me since we walked in. That part didn't shock me. She'd been distant for weeks, maybe longer. We had that kind of silence that doesn't come from fights, just erosion. But what I didn't expect was how her eyes lit up the moment he walked in. Like floodlights in a power outage. His name was Julian, and I only know that because I heard it pass her lips with the kind of breath you only save for people you dream about at night and never tell your husband. He hadn't even looked at her yet, but she was already halfway across the room, her heels clicking like she was walking on purpose for the first time in months. I watched her, my wife, throw herself into his arms like she hadn't just arrived with me, like I wasn't standing there holding her coat, like I wasn't real, and no one cared. They clapped, like it was some grand romantic movie playing out in front of them, as if I hadn't been the one holding her hand through panic attacks, or staying up to scrub red wine out of her favorite cardigan, or lying awake wondering why she never touched me anymore. Then she whispered something in his ear, and I'll never forget the way his face changed. Not in fear, not in surprise, but in regret, like whatever she said confirmed something terrible. And right there, still in his arms, she crumpled. People screamed. Phones flew out of pockets. I stood frozen. I didn't run. I didn't scream her name. I just watched the man she'd clung to lower her to the ground like she was a broken doll. And for a moment, I swear, he didn't even look worried. He looked resigned. Paramedics came fast. Too fast. Like someone had expected this. Like it was always going to happen. They asked if I was the husband. I nodded. They asked if she had a history of seizures. I shook my head. They asked if she'd been under stress. And Julian was the one who answered. She didn't want to come tonight, he said. She knew what this would do. What did he mean by that? That was only the first question. There were many more. And over the next 7 days, I would find out everything. The affair, the secret meetings, the pills I never knew she was taking, and the letter she hid in the kitchen drawer addressed not to me, but to him. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a slow, calculated erasure of our life, and I had front row seats the whole time without realizing the show wasn't about me. She didn't wake up at the venue. They took her out on a stretcher, and I had to sit in the back of the ambulance because Julian, for some reason, was allowed in the front seat like he was family. I remember watching his reflection in the rearview mirror. His jaw was clenched the entire ride, but his eyes weren't scared. They were haunted. I had the sickest feeling in my stomach, and I kept telling myself it was just shock. But something inside me already knew. This wasn't a simple fainting spell. Something had been building long before tonight. At the hospital, I wasn't the one they asked questions to. The nurse kept glancing at Julian, and he, like he had some unspoken authority, answered them all. He knew about her allergies, her migraines, even the name of her primary physician. I stood there like an idiot, holding her purse, feeling like I'd been pushed out of my own life. Eventually, someone asked me if I was okay, and I said yes, but I wasn't. I felt like I was floating above everything, watching this weird scene where my wife belonged to someone else and I was just the guy who drove her there. When they finally let me see her, she was still unconscious. Machines beeped softly, and her face looked pale under the fluorescent lights. I sat beside her and tried to hold her hand, but it felt limp and unfamiliar. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Under her wrist was a faint red mark, like a smudge from lipstick, but she hadn't been wearing any. And Julian? He'd been wearing a crimson tie. I don't know why, but that tie kept flashing in my mind like a warning signal. After about an hour, I stepped into the hallway to catch my breath. I didn't expect to hear voices, but I did. Around the corner, whispering. Julian was on the phone. I only caught a few words, but it was enough to turn my legs to concrete. He said, "No, she didn't tell him. She never told him. I didn't think she'd show up tonight. This changes everything. My heart dropped. My ears started ringing. I backed away before he saw me and went to the restroom just to lock myself in a stall and breathe. What hadn't she told me? And what had he meant by, "This changes everything"? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of her hospital room, pretending to read something on my phone just so the nurses wouldn't try to talk to me. Delaney stayed unconscious for hours, hooked up to machines that blinked and beeped like metronomes to my spiraling thoughts. Every few minutes, I'd glance at her face, hoping she'd open her eyes, say something, anything, to remind me I still existed in her world. But she didn't. She just lay there, motionless, as if her body had shut down to avoid the truth catching up to it. I kept replaying Julian's voice in my head. She never told him. Told me what? That she still loved him? That I was just a placeholder? That this whole marriage was a cover story while her real life waited somewhere else? And why did he sound more frustrated than concerned? Like she had messed up some plan they had put in place. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had walked into a story that had been unfolding without me. One I had no lines in. Around 4 a.m. She stirred. Not a dramatic wake-up. No gasping or blinking in confusion. Her eyes just opened. She looked at the ceiling, not at me. I whispered her name. Nothing. I stood up and moved closer, calling her again, this time more firmly. She finally turned her head, and the look in her eyes made my blood run cold. It wasn't fear. It wasn't love. It was recognition of something inconvenient, like she had just remembered I was still part of the picture. "Julian?" she croaked, voice dry. "Not Merritt. Not what happened. Not even where am I. Just his name." I didn't answer her. I just stepped back, feeling something inside me crack. Not break. Just loosen, like a foundation quietly shifting before a collapse. She looked around, realized where she was, then tried to sit up too fast. I instinctively reached out to help her, but she pulled away like my hand burned her skin. I stood there, awkwardly, like a stranger in my own life. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. I wasn't even sure if she was talking to me or to him in her head. That morning, a nurse came in with a clipboard and told me Delaney had requested to be discharged early. Against advice. She said she had unfinished business. She left with a prescription and a warning to rest. She didn't go home with me. She didn't even ask if I'd drive her. And when I saw her step into Julian's black sedan waiting in the hospital lot, without hesitation, I realized something terrible. This wasn't new. This had been going on for a long, long time. I didn't go to work the next day. I didn't call in either. I just sat at our kitchen table staring at the mug she always used. This stupid yellow one with a chipped handle and faded Carpe Diem text from some tourist shop in Vermont. It was still sitting in the dish rack, like it had more right to be in this house than I did. I must have circled through 100 thoughts that morning, but one kept burning itself into the front of my mind. She got into his car. Willingly. No explanation. No apology. No shame. As if I were nothing more than a friend from another lifetime she'd outgrown. When the garage door opened that afternoon, I thought maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she was coming home to talk, or yell, or lie. I would have taken anything at that point. But it wasn't her. It was her sister, Kinley. She stepped into the house without knocking and shut the door behind her with this look like she already knew something I didn't. I asked her what she was doing there. She sat down across from me and just stared for a while. Then she said, "You don't know, do you?" I didn't even ask no what. I just shook my head. Kinley exhaled like she was debating whether to blow up my world or leave it standing a little longer. Then she pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her purse. Not a letter. Not some neat confession. It was a printout, an email, actually. The subject line hit me first. NYC transfer confirmation. Full relocation. Approved. It was from Delaney's work. 3 weeks old. The rest of the email was filled with dry HR language about dates and moving assistance and travel reimbursement. At the bottom, plain as daylight, was Delaney's digital signature. I reread it 3 times, then looked at Kinley. She didn't tell me anything. Kinley's jaw tightened. I begged her not to go through with it like this. I told her to just tell you the truth. You deserved that much. What truth? My voice cracked when I said it. She hesitated. She was going to leave you next week. That reunion, that wasn't some accident. It was her goodbye. I think I stopped breathing. The pieces were falling into place now. The strange distance, the rushed discharges, the man whose name she whispered while half-conscious. Julian wasn't just some old flame. He was the future she'd been planning behind my back while I folded laundry and ordered groceries like everything was fine. But why collapse? I asked almost to myself. Kinley shook her head. She's been on something. Anti-anxiety meds. New ones. Strong. Her body's been reacting badly for days. She told me she'd been feeling dizzy. I think the stress, the moment, it overwhelmed her. I laughed, bitterly. She's overwhelmed? Kinley looked down. She's scared too, Merritt. More than she lets on. That sentence sat like a stone in my throat. She was scared. But of what? Of me? Of the truth coming out? Or of finally stepping into the life she actually wanted? Later that evening, I stood outside our bedroom door for over an hour, debating whether to open it or just start packing. Her perfume still lingered in the hallway, like a ghost. And on our bed, folded neatly, was the gray blazer I wore to the reunion. I don't know why, but seeing it there made everything collapse inside me all over again. I didn't cry that night, not because I didn't want to, but because the tears had been used up somewhere between the hospital and that printed email. I just stared at the ceiling, whispering questions to no one. Questions I knew would never be answered. And when my phone finally lit up with a message from an unknown number at 2:11 a.m., I felt a jolt of something I didn't recognize anymore. Fear? Anger? Hope? I opened it. We need to talk. Please. I didn't mean for it to happen this way. It wasn't signed. But I knew exactly who it was. And I wasn't sure if I wanted the truth anymore, or if I was just addicted to the pain. I didn't reply to her message. Not because I didn't want to, I did. Every fiber of me wanted to text her back with 1,000 questions, 1,000 accusations, maybe even a desperate, please just tell me why. But something in me had changed. Something small but irreversible. Like a string had snapped and I didn't know which one. I stared at the message for hours, letting it sit there like a wound that hadn't clotted yet. Eventually, the screen dimmed and so did the urge to chase her for answers. The next day, I went to her office. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe her. Maybe proof. Maybe some sign that I hadn't imagined everything. Her coworker, I think her name was Molly, gave me a strange look when I walked in. She didn't smile, didn't say hello. Just stood there, awkward and stiff like someone caught between obligation and discomfort. I'm looking for Delaney, I said quietly. Molly bit her lip. She's not here today. Out sick. She hesitated too long before answering. Sort of. I waited, hoping she'd say more. She didn't. Do you know if she's okay? I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be. She left early yesterday, she said finally. With someone. Tall guy. Drove a black BMW. Said they were taking care of something personal. Julian. Of course. I don't know what possessed me, but I asked, did you know she was planning to leave? Like for New York? Molly blinked fast. She didn't tell you? My stomach twisted. She talked about it like it was already decided, Molly added. Like you two had agreed. I nodded slowly, pretending that made sense. Then I turned around and walked out, my ears burning with humiliation. On the sidewalk outside, I couldn't stop thinking about how many people knew. How many strangers had been given access to the parts of my life that were kept hidden from me. I wasn't just being left behind. I'd been locked out of my own marriage while the walls were quietly rearranged. Back at home, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened her laptop. I know, I shouldn't have. It wasn't mine. Felt like betrayal. But what do you call it when someone builds a second life behind your back and lets you keep living in the shell of the first? I typed in the password. Still our wedding date, ironically, and waited. What I found wasn't shocking. Not exactly. But it cut deeper than I was prepared for. There were emails. Dozens. Some mundane. Some personal. Some with subject lines that still make my skin crawl. Rental confirmed. Flight itinerary. Julian timeline discussion. And one folder, buried under client files, titled simply, Next. Inside were photos. Of them. Not scandalous, not intimate. Just familiar. Smiling over coffee. Sitting on a bench in what looked like Central Park. Her leaning against his shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. They had a life. And it didn't include me. I closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at nothing, wondering how I had become the shadow in a story I thought I was writing. How had I missed this? How many nights had I laid beside her while she was already gone? The message was still on my phone. We need to talk. And now I realized, no, she needed to talk. I had done enough listening. But the part that scared me the most wasn't the betrayal. She showed up 2 days later like nothing had shattered. No warning, no call. Just the sound of her keys in the lock like she still had permission to come and go as she pleased. I was in the living room, sitting on the floor surrounded by open boxes. Not packing. Just staring at things I hadn't looked at in years. Souvenirs from a life I thought was built together. Ticket stubs, Polaroids, notes written on napkins. They all felt like props from a play I didn't audition for. Delaney stepped inside, saw me, and froze. She didn't look surprised to see me. More like unsure how to begin. She wasn't dressed like someone who'd been grieving or spiraling. She looked put together, calm, and that somehow made it worse. I didn't think you'd be here, she said. I laughed under my breath. It's still my house, isn't it? She stepped forward. Can we talk? I didn't answer. I just pointed at the couch. She sat slowly, clutching her purse like it was armor. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she started. I didn't plan for it to happen like this. I stared at her. That's the first thing you want to say? I mean it, she said quickly. I was going to tell you. Everything spun out at the reunion. No, Delaney, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I expected. Everything revealed itself at the reunion. You'd already made your decisions before that night. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know how to hurt you less. I blinked hard. So instead, you tried hurting me quietly? There was a pause. Then, almost defensively, she said, Julian came back into my life last year. We ran into each other in Boston at a conference. We got coffee. That's all it was at first. I shook my head. Don't do that, the at first part. You're not softening anything. She leaned forward, her voice trembling. I wasn't happy, Merritt. I hadn't been for a long time. I felt like I was disappearing. That hit me like a slap. She was disappearing? I had spent the past 3 years being slowly erased, only realizing it too late. I wanted to scream, to shout every hurtful thing that had been boiling inside me. But what came out was quiet. Just one word. Why? She didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, because he made me feel alive again. I stood up, walking toward the kitchen so she wouldn't see my face. I didn't trust myself. I stared at the fridge, at the calendar still stuck on the month before. She hadn't even flipped it to August. So what now? I asked, not turning around. She hesitated. I'm still leaving. The job, the apartment, it's already set up. I turned slowly. So this talk, it's not to fix anything. It's just to unload your guilt before you go. She nodded, painfully honest. I guess so. And that's when something inside me, something small and soft, finally went cold. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I just nodded once and said, then go. But don't come back for anything. I'll box it up. I'll send it wherever you're going. She stood, hesitated like she was waiting for some grand emotional gesture from me, maybe even a final fight. But I had nothing left to give her. She walked to the door, paused and whispered, you were a good man, Merritt. And I didn't respond, because I realized she wasn't saying it to comfort me. She was saying it to excuse herself. The silence after she left wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, loud in its own way. Every object in the house seemed to mock me with its stillness. The couch cushion she always tucked under her leg, the crooked picture frame in the hallway we never fixed, the dusty piano she insisted we buy even though she never played. It all stared back at me like pieces of a life built on borrowed time. And I finally saw it clearly. I had spent years living next to a woman who was already halfway out the door, and I kept pretending the sound of her keys in the lock meant she was coming home. 3 days passed. I didn't tell anyone. Not Kinley, not my boss, not my friends. I walked through the motions like a body without a soul. I even answered a call from Delaney's mother and lied. Said she was out running errands. What was I supposed to say? Oh, she left me for a man she used to daydream about while I made her tea? No. It was easier to lie than to relive it every time someone asked. But that illusion cracked on the 4th night. A manila envelope appeared at my doorstep. No name, no return address. Just taped shut like it carried something too important for words. I brought it inside and sat at the table, staring at it like it might explode. For a second, I wondered if she'd written to me, if this was her way of saying all the things she couldn't say face to face. But when I finally opened it, what I found sent a chill through my chest. Photos. Printed. Not digital. Not screenshots. Real, tangible photographs. Black and white. Grainy. Time-stamped. The kind you'd expect from a private investigator. Not that I ever thought I'd recognize that kind of thing, but these looked exactly like the ones you see in courtroom dramas and cheating exposés. One was of Julian and Delaney leaving a hotel. Another, them kissing at a train station. Another, walking hand in hand in the middle of a farmer's market 2 towns over. A place she told me she hated because it was always too crowded. They weren't discreet. They weren't scared. They looked like a couple living their truth while I was stuck in someone else's fiction. Then I saw the last photo. It wasn't time-stamped. It was printed on glossier paper. The back read only, Boston, last fall. It was Delaney, alone, in a coat I'd never seen. Her hand was resting gently over her stomach. She was pregnant, or had been. I dropped the photo. My hands were shaking. My mind couldn't wrap around what I was seeing. There had never been a miscarriage. No talk of it. No missed periods. Nothing. Unless the baby wasn't mine, and she never planned to tell me at all. My head started spinning. I grabbed the envelope again, searching for a note or explanation, something to prove this wasn't real. But there was nothing. Just that final photo, staring up at me like the final puzzle piece to a life I never truly had. I don't know who sent them. Kinley swore it wasn't her when I finally broke down and called. She cried when I told her. Said she didn't know about the pregnancy. That she was just trying to protect me from the ugliness. But here it was. Ugly. Raw. Unavoidable. Delaney hadn't just walked away from our marriage. She had rewritten it completely, while I was still living inside the original version. And suddenly, I wasn't just grieving the loss of my wife. I thought about burning the photos. I even held a lighter to the edge of one, watching the paper curl and blacken, waiting for the heat to erase what my mind couldn't. But I didn't follow through. Not because I wanted to keep them, because I didn't want to give them that much power. Instead, I slid them back into the envelope, sealed it shut, and dropped it in the bottom drawer of the file cabinet I used for taxes and warranties. Let the past sit with the paperwork. Things that no longer breathe but still take up space. The following week, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I went to the lake. The same one I used to visit before Delaney and I even met, back when my problems were smaller and my dreams were still mine alone. I brought an old sketch pad. Not because I was any good at drawing, but because it gave my hands something to do while my mind wandered. I sat by the water for hours. The breeze was soft. The sun didn't scorch. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a man unraveling. I felt like someone beginning again. A kid walked by with his dad, laughing about ducks chasing their sandwich crusts. And I realized something then, something I wish I had known earlier. Love isn't always betrayal waiting to happen. Sometimes it's just a lesson that ends before you're ready. But that doesn't mean you failed. It just means the chapter changed. Delaney never reached out again after that last visit. No texts, no emails, No dramatic goodbye, just silence. And you know what? I think I prefer it that way. Sometimes closure isn't something you get from someone else. Sometimes it's something you choose. I sold the house a month later, packed up everything, moved across state lines, and started fresh. New apartment, new town. No memories attached to the kitchen counter or the driveway or the empty side of the bed. I got a rescue dog named Arthur. He drools too much and steals socks, but he sits next to me every morning while I drink my coffee and reminds me that loyalty doesn't have to be complicated. I'm not healed, not entirely, but I'm no longer broken either. And if you're listening to this, if you've ever stood where I stood, watching someone you loved walk out of your life like it meant nothing, I want you to know this. It will hurt, but it won't destroy you. You will wake up again. You will laugh again. You will feel light again. And maybe, just maybe, you'll even thank the person who left. Because without their exit, you never would have made room for what's next. Thanks for watching. You've been on Reddit Confessions, and I'd love to hear from you. What's one historical moment, from any place, any era, that made you realize life can change in an instant? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.